happen, but they had a Murden. They could have gotten engages and got those kills that you were mentioning, which are pivotal to break them down.
Well, first map ended in favor of Tempest, so we are going to head into our second map now to try and take a closer look at what is chosen here. And it's actually Tempest with a pick on Sky Temple.
No surprise to be able to take us to Sky Temple. I would want to argue that this is a little bit better now that it's a less macro-focused map. China has always been known to be absolutely dominant when it comes to the team fighting. Sky Temple, I would argue, is legitimately probably the only map in the game where you can solely rely on your team fight capabilities to be able to win. And so if they are dominant in that fashion here, it might be a little bit closer than the last game.
After what you saw in the last game, do you think that they have a good shot?
I feel like we didn't even get to see them, right? Dragonshire is a map that you need to macro, otherwise you never get the team fight. So they failed the macro, and then we saw the entire time it was just watch Tempest hit swaps and get kills. So, I mean, there were a couple of downsides, and the few skirmishes we saw, Shy's positioning was obviously a focal point, but, I mean, he's also the 5th member that is coming in to represent them for this tournament, so it's hard to be critical.
The one thing that I found extremely interesting is that considering how they announced already that macro is going to be a huge focus for them, CE kind of failed to put Dehaka into that position where he has that gank potential. If you compare the threat that comes from Dehaka to what we see from Whoopi on Fnatic, who always will go onto another lane, try to join the rest of the team, get the drag and then the kill, this is something that CE just wasn't able to pull off. But as we're heading into the draft for game number 2, we see the same opening here once again. Stitches and also Genji being banned out, and CE right away speccing into the Oriole.
So this automatically makes me very concerned for CE unless it's like a snap Cho'Gall or something coming after this rotation. Just because we know that Oriole into any form of double supporting, it is not nearly as dominant if you can't gain value out of your early game macro pressure onto the front walls. Yes, you might be able to pick up a little bit on a map like Sky Temple, but it typically, unless you're going for like that rare TLV side soak 4-man collapse composition, doesn't work out. So I'm already a little bit concerned, even though it is just one pick, because the playstyle Oriole does promote currently in the meta.
For me, I want to see actually a snap Uther and Bala. First off, I want Bala because you have a better time in the early game compared to with Lunara. 2, the combination of Oriole and Uther is outstanding, and you'll be able to fight on the shrines, at least in the middle, and float around against their opponent. When you look at Tempest, who's gone into Greymane and Abathur, which means they're looking for more duels here, and of course get past that level 10 there and allow the Abathur and double Greymane to be effective.
Another thing that you have to watch out for, of course, with Abathur being picked is a global on the side of CE, trying to put a bit more pressure on Abathur, who, if that's not the case, it's just simply going to focus on their top lane and soak during the second temple phase all day long. Illidan is going to be taken now, and I actually think from CE, that's a pretty smart move here, because if you don't pick Illidan now, even with Tempest not having the same priority on him as MVP Black, that would have been a priority pick for Tempest here, since they already have Greymane, they can go into the Abathur and Illidan and put high pressure in team fights onto their backline.
I think the coolest thing for CE is that they don't have to, but they're primed to be in a position to run a warriorless composition on a map that you can get away with it. By having a double support with the Oriole and then the Illidan onto the front line, as long as they find themselves obviously a battery that they're going to need, but another solid skirmisher to be able to aid with that Illidan on the front line, we could find not only a creative composition, but also an absolutely deadly one, originally displayed at the midseason brawl by E-Star, also out of the Chinese region.
See what the ban is going to be here to try and prevent that from happening. There is always the obvious answer if you want to get rid of that hyper carry. Odin already be in here though, might dissuade them to go into something else. Maybe try to get rid of a popular tank, and they decide to actually move in with the Anubrak. So the Anubrak will be banned out, and Tempest now will have to deal with whatever may come the way of CE. Do they move into the Uther ban here? Yes, they do.
I feel that the new Brook was already a pretty smart ban, because it just would promote even more the aggressive playstyle that we are expecting from the Chinese team. You have the Illidan in your setup already, so you are trying to engage hard against your opponent. But as we now see the Uther ban being confirmed here, Greymane is going to have a bit more of a rough time in that setup. And I actually think after what we've seen in the last game, it's a smart ban here, especially, of course, since you're now forcing your opponent into potential Rega play.
I still expect Tempest, even though with the double support on the other side and so much focus going into the support in the draft to pick up their support here for Hyde. I am curious, is it going to be Malfurion or are we going to find ourselves the Rhaegar? Rhaegar makes the most sense traditionally, but Malfurion has been higher prioritization within the Korean region than almost every other part of the world after the cleanse nerf.
By a lot, actually. MVP Black earlier went away from the Malfurion and instead went into Rhaegar since they wanted to help out Illidan here in particular.
Yeah.
But in this case, Tempest definitely had both options here. And with them going into Rhaegar, they are now putting heavy pressure on helping out Greymane in these fights and making sure that, similar to the Uther style, they have another panic button. Not quite to the extent that the Divine Shield helps you out when you're in trouble, but Rhaegar with the Ancestral, if timed properly, especially if you buy a bit more time with your level 13 with the Earthen Shield, can supply a similar function.
I really hope we see a warrior list composition for CE. Into the double global onto the other side, macro is reasonable when you have the Illidan, but you lose now the Dahaka matchup because an Abathur exists on the other side. I mean, it's obvious it's going to be a battery. The question is it the Lunara? Is it the Vala? Vala for the early game, I would argue I still like Lunara, especially if you go Warriorless, just because you need that slow. You need somebody to make sure you get the initiation, enable the Illidan to be a problem. But the composition Tempest has isn't necessarily incapable of dealing with it, but it would struggle against that style of play.
Well, it's time to reveal what we're going to be getting here from CE. It's Lunara into Arthas. So they're going to go with the traditional a little bit here. Lunara, of course, helping out, getting that spike at level 7. And then, of course, Arthas is going to be great around those temples. He has his own sustain, able to help out in the fights. And if he lands with Howling Blast on Rhaegar or Greymane, they can, of course, get those kills.
With Arthas, there's also a lot of respect against Greymane, I think, after what we saw in the last game, just trying to slow him down. Of course, it's not necessarily a tank that we always see with Illidan, since you're lacking a bit of the engage potential that other tanks offer. Nuburak being an example, banned out in this case. We have seen him oftentimes also comboed, even with Tyrael in the days of old. We have seen him also at times with even a Muradin that jumps in together with Illidan. Arthas is lacking a bit of this, but he's of course that high hit point battery. And if he gets the lockdown with the Howling Blast first, he also synergizes well with Lunara if we again see the unfair advantage with Shai already prioritized in the last game.
I really hope this is a Tyrael pick for Tempest. It deals really well with the Illidan and to the Arthas. You don't have as much individual lockdown to be able to get the pick onto the Illidan specifically, but it deals with the, okay, they go with the Muradin, so that's the lockdown I was saying with the deal with the Illidan, but I feel like if they pick up the Tyrael, a double Greymane is so intimidating to be able to dive onto the backline of what we see on the side of CE. But I mean, it's no surprise they go into the Muradin route. It's, I would argue, less risky, but maybe not overall the most synergistic for their comp.
I feel that with Tyrael, the one thing that you lack out on is just simply you have no hard CC against Illidan. So that's the one problem. So you're basically playing a lot around the sanctification.
Yeah, I mean, well, you have the Dahaka on the one side, which could be that hard crowd control if you absolutely need it, but honest, Illidan, typically, as long as Arthas moves in and you're like, oh no, Arthas is on me, the Illidan's going to be a problem. Sanctification turn with the double Greymane is just going to kill anyone, and that's kind of why I argue I like the Tyrael a bit more. The damage output capabilities can outweigh the lack of crowd control, but again, it's safer to move into the Muradin. You do have that ability to kill the Illidan, and Tempest has got to feel favored, so safer choices in the long run should be the better ones.
Well, Tempest makes a choice into Muradin, and to the left side of our second map, we now have a CE with Illidan and Lunara being supported by Auriel and Tassadar and Arthas at that front line.
In the red here, it's Tempest, already up one game, looking so very dominant into the first one. And it's going to be with a really creative, or not creative, but old school kind of composition. The biggest thing here is going to be, have you ever watched a Wizened Duelist Greymane with an Abathur hat? Because it hurts.
That's one of the things that I'm personally pretty curious about, because when we saw Rhaegar being picked, that was the first thought process. Okay, if they go into Rhaegar over a Malfurion, we are going to see again Greymane going for that Wizened Duelist build that we have shown in game number 1. And that's exactly the case right now. But CE must have also addressed it, or is trying to address it with Arthas. So they really feel that in this setup, even though Abathur, as you said, is going to be huge when it comes to keeping Greymane alive and helping him to get those kills, CE seems to feel very confident that their draft can now deal with Greymane a lot better than on Dragonshire.
Yeah, and I mean, a lot of that's going to be on to win there with the Arthas, which I want to give credit to him. His Arthas play has been phenomenal throughout the region overall. I would argue, for me, it feels like it's a hero that is kind of stand out for him, whether or not they agree or not. I guess maybe we'll find through this game. But so far it's going to be slow pressure here from CE. And again, so taking a look at what we know of the Western world, if you see an Abathur composition and you have a Tassadar, Ariel, Lunara, you immediately go, you're losing every front wall that you have. But this is a case where the Illidan is keeping a bit of pressure on top. It's still running a 2-1-2, and it's just questioning, are they gaining as much as they could? A map like Sky Temple, I don't think it's going to hurt them. But on Dragonshire, I think it's pretty clear what happened.
I mean, for now we have the temples actually starting to activate, and Lunara is already pressuring the bot lane, which is exactly what you've been talking about right now. Abathur normally with the bit weaker early game. Some teams make up for it by using a global to just jump with Abathur in and turning it on the lane into a quick 1 versus 3. So far that's not happening here. And Lunara actually decides to not go for the pressure play against Abathur down at the bottom of the map. Instead they are fighting hard for that mid temple, as the top lane has already been taken over by Tempest.
So I feel a lot is in the hands of CE here to be able to try and make a play happen. The stall out through mid, I feel like the transition up towards top might be the most beneficial for them, because you know Lockdown there on the Abathur is going to be very satisfied that he's kind of been left alone and that it's been a flat trade once again for the early stages of the game. Not something you typically can say when you're the Abathur composition, but now the rotation here for CE might be able to deny a few shots.
Yes, he is at least trying to push them off here, but Lunara has taken the experience now at the bot lane. After you're basically getting out there, we're barely getting out with that Tassadar.
I've never seen a dimensional warp that late. I thought for sure, I was like, that Stormbolt had to have hit, right? But that was so very close.
Yeah, but now Lunara is at least able to push a bit at that bot lane, as long as nobody starts to rotate down from Tempest. Now the one hero that you have to be a bit careful for is of course still the Haka, who could move in and then get the Abathur head, but the Haka finds himself still top and should probably remain there also for quite some time. And of course you expect him to come back to the bot lane very late after the second temple has been announced.
CE is doing a double camp right now, which is an amazing play, again, for the early stages into the composition Tempest has. They just need to make something happen with it. The Tassadar is still being the placeholder up onto top. Either Arthas or Tassadar, someone needs to make their way down there to be able to match the pressure of Tempest, because they were able to get a double camp as well. And I mean, I don't know how many times you can say it, but if you have an Abathur composition and you go even throughout all stages of the game up until probably the 16 mark, there is a very, very low chance that you are going to find yourself able to win the game, because he's so powerful in the later stages with the clone, especially now that we're post 4, we have Adrenal Overload, Wiz and Duelist is going to hit here at 7, and Hankono is suddenly evolved to a monster.
A lot of that really hinges around the second temple phase, let's say. CE needs to make sure that first of all they win the temple, and also that they're not losing out too much at that top lane, because Abathur together with the Haka are most likely trying to counter pressure and maybe even get the fort. So as long as CE recognizes this early on and is able to make the rotation and so experience and defend their structures, they should at least take a small lead that they can use against Tempest by maybe even getting a boss if they're able to get 210 fast enough.
Hyde there on that Rhaegar. We haven't talked too much about Hyde, and it's a player for me that stands out on the side of Tempest. Nice drag here from H82. The hat's going to be dropped. Paradise falls. You know, not maybe the flashiest of First Blood, but it is still very much that here. 4 minutes and 30 seconds in the game. Shuyu should have Dimensional Shift.
That's gonna be rough now. Okay, he gets the shield in, but the problem is that the timing of the kill against Illidan is nearly perfect. The temple is now activating, and with Illidan not being there in the mix, all of a sudden they can actually contest. Now we had Muradin jumping out, but they are in a position where we have 2 heroes up at the top lane for Tempest, now heading back to base, and they now have to decide if they actually want to try and contest the bot lane, or if they're simply splitting onto the lanes again to make sure that they are soaking. But not even Abathur has been transitioning to the top lane at this point.
Yeah, it's actually a lot of pressure onto Luke Fool. H82 trying to make his way out, wins with that slow. Burrow is going to be enough to deter. Hyde comes down, drops himself a heal, but Illidan and Tassadar are all inning onto the mid fort. There is going to be no interest remaining here for CE onto the bottom shrine, but Tempest goes in knowing this. The Stormbolt lands onto Shy. Once again, Shy's positioning so very risky, and Tempest getting themselves a second kill.
And immediately we have CE going in for Hyde, and they get the kill. Rhaegar is down. Illidan coming down to the bot lane, turning the fight for them, even though it was a 4 versus 5 at that time. Hyde already a little bit too far out. He was the one that confirmed the kill against Lunara by jumping in, and he jumped deep, but already a bit too deep. and that is now a 1-for-1 trade in the fight, and CE hitting an earlier level 10 thanks to Wind on Arthur's taking over the temple.
Yeah, it's a very nice moment here, a breath of fresh air, if you will, for CE. The fact that that bottom fort fell, not because of Sky Temple and because that is so impactful, mainly the mule that Abathur has. You cannot risk leaving structures at 50% or lower, or it just gains so much momentum and so easy to essentially, I argue, Mule kind of breaks the rules on how Sky Temple has to play. If your opponent has one and you do not, you need to be very considerate of when you're putting attention and free damage into any version of a structure. Mid lane, for instance, right now for CE is not something that they want to leave in that case, but until another Shrine phase spawns, it's unlikely Tempest is going to let them get that out there with that Mule on their side.
CE is definitely going to try and force these structures down a little bit more than they usually would, because you can already tell that Abathur is working on the mid lane here. But now with more camps being taken, they are trying to focus a little bit more on the macro play.
Wow.
Nice kill against Tassadar. Illidan was actually starting to move in and now went for the hunt, but he arrived a bit too late at the scene here to really have an impact. They're still trying to go for their Haka, and they're just continuing to go. CE is willing to fight here as Tempest slowly kites back. The Ancestral hits the Haka, but in comes Sign, tries to look for the Stormbolt. Illidan needs to be careful, but Sign is way too deep. Barely getting saved here. Ow.
Oh, that Aegis explosion doing so much damage. Now Shy's going to have himself a nice little cleanup Wind, getting the final slow. Lockdown's actually going to get the clone onto Rhaegar just for that Feral Lunge bite, but it's not enough to get a kill. What an amazing team fight here for CE. So back and forth, but the Aegis hitting after Sign committed for the Dwarf Toss Stormbolt onto Aluful is the sole reason they were able to win that fight.
They already were in a position where they won 2 team fights after the initial target of Tempest died. At the bottom fight, Tempest were trying to go for Oriel. They get the kill, but Illidan rotates in and they turn it. Right now, we have Tassadar falling apart. Illidan comes in with a hunt, and they are able to turn this around. And as you said, at some point, Tempest said, hey, we were kiting back the entire time. We baited them in. Here comes the Ancestral. The Haka is ready to go again. And that was really the cue where Muradin said, all right, boys, let's do this. Jumps back in, tries to get the kill, but they are with the Aegis and just the pressure that Illidan got in, able to get 3 kills. So 4 versus 5 kills overall, still in favor of Tempest. But CE still holds the lead in experience and is about to hit that 13 talent.
Not only do they hold the lead in experience, they're winning when it comes to the structure HP, even though they don't have the Mule onto their side. Mule was picked up, but mid-fort hasn't been touched at all.
There was one Mule earlier on, and that was about it. Since then, we haven't seen one.
Yeah, I haven't. I haven't been able to find whether or not Mule's been used too frequently here, but so far looking at the HP of the structures, it doesn't seem like that is the case throughout this game. And you know, H82 is really struggling into Wind's Arthas. I brought it up before, not only does it play it very, very well, but the biggest thing is the isolation pickup there into the group. We talked about why take Rhaegar over the Mouth? Because Korea enjoys their Malfurion so much. You need to make sure that that Wisdom Duel stays alive. Well, who's going to keep the Haka alive? With the Arthas constantly slowing them and having no escape tools, it's going to be a problem. The biggest silver lining for Tempest is that with that they hit 13, Muradin has the opportunity to be more effective, keep himself alive. That last fight, Sign, for instance, will keep alive now that he has the 13 talent here. But I'm still not, it's not as clear-cut as it seemed.
It's not only Muradin though. Now with so much transference on Abathur, we have another hero that has a good tool to just keep either the Haka or Greymane alive when they engage into that backline. And on top of that, the Earth and Shield of Rhaegar really helps you out to just get a bit more time to get the Ancestral through. So I feel when it comes to sustain and survivability in the team fight, Tempest has now made a massive jump post 13. But it's still pretty impressive what CE is able to do in these team fights. So they just showed that while they themselves feel macro game is the solution, that team fighting is really what puts them ahead.
Yeah, they started to excel in that regard. Most of it comes down to Shy and his positioning. The first kill that we saw from him a little bit too forward, but he's now understood, okay, I'm not going to push my limits too much, which allows for them to get those Splinter Spear spikes in there, of course bringing out the damage, and then of course when there's always Illidan on the side, sharking around, it's very difficult to come in and force that fight.
And I feel it's also a little bit Shy just accepting that he needs to play a bit more passive, as you just said. Like, he was so aggressive, especially in the first game, never really respecting the swaps on Atanas, for example, and finding themselves in a bad spot. Now that he has Arthas and also Illidan creating a bit more space for him, he still has fallen back slightly, so that he is not as easy of a target anymore as he was in the first game.
And even though you know, CE has got Shy as the replacement. We wanted to talk about like calming down a little bit. I feel like Shuyu has to be noted here. His Tassadar has been so far out in so many cases, kind of just off on an island doing his own thing. That I really, if you showed me the play we've seen of CE so far and you said, who's the new guy? 100% it would be Shuyu.
I think that might be an adjustment, though, that was discussed amongst them, because I feel like it's the same thing with the Loof here on the Ariel. Both of them on the supports are stepping up a little bit more than you would normally see, and I think they're trying to bait out those CCs and can rely on the 4-man squad to do well and allow for, of course, Shy to be on that Lenara on that backside bringing out the damage, because I feel like the Ariel's been in trouble a lot and has gotten out of some very sticky situations.
For me, it's really, I said it after the first game, that I really want to see if they, given that they will, depending on how many games they are going to get here, how much of synergy within the tournament is now going to form in this team. If you come into a tournament and you have to replace one of your players, that of course takes a huge chunk away from how dangerous or how good you originally were. They said we were aiming for top 3, then we knew where we are thinking somewhere in the top 6. So they immediately corrected their entire idea about this tournament. But if they have a little bit more time to get that synergy going, maybe they're the ones who can have a bit of a fight against Korea. And so far in that second game, CE definitely has the tools.
What is it with game number 2s against Koreans? It seems like teams suddenly just turn it on for the tournament. Also, another thing to point out too, going into 16 though, Greymane does have the option to move into that Alpha Killer, which could be enough to burn down Arthas. Arthas has been a good spot so far, but I do feel like he's getting on that lower and lower and lower side. That little edge from Alpha Killer might be enough for Honkano to come in there and bring in those kills.
That makes a lot of sense too, because I mean, we know Arthas early on can be such a big problem to deal with, but a lot of characters, you know, kind of can distribute that damage too highly, and it's not a traditional double support on the side of CE, so that is something, you know, Tassadar might have to be more and more effective with the shielding if they're going to be okay in these later team fights.
What's going to be interesting for me is once, I think unless we have a team fight and maybe a few kills before it happens, I feel at some point CE is going to be the team that looks for maybe a fight around the boss area. They are the ones who are focusing a lot of the fights, and having that on-spot fight where once again Arthas can shine, Illidan can just jump around, and you have the good positioning, you have the AoEs of Tassadar that you can use. Once that happens, that could really make or break the game for either CE or Tempest.
No, I agree with you. You have two things that can happen there. One, you can force an ultimate evolution and just back away. Or two, you can literally stretch out the fight so long that it gets to a point where the opposing team has to all in and force something to happen, or they just straight up lose out on the boss. And at that point, Illidan's like, okay, it's time to hunt in, comes in and brings the damage. I agree, that'd be really cool to see.
It's going to be interesting just how the game actually plays out at this point, because again, it's so weird because CE did prioritize their macro and struggled on a macro map. And then again, the China team fighting map suddenly show a lot more dominance against a team like Tempest. So it's just like, do we suddenly see Tempest withdraw, stop trying to take team fights, concentrate on what they would consider an advantage, again, kind of maybe neglecting the shot like we saw in the secondary shrine phase from CE, and then focus more structurally, then maybe because they're so far behind structurally, they might have to be the team with the panic boss. They don't have the Tyrael Holy Ground, you know, that I was kind of talking about in the draft. Either way, it's closer than I would have guessed, you know, going into the game before the draft.
For me, it's just so funny. When we went last year, spring last year, we went to one of the first international tournaments where we said, okay, we want to see China. And all the Chinese teams back then said, they don't understand why people back off fights. They were like, macro game, what is that? We want fights, we want kills, we want to go into every single battle. And that's how they played. Every fight they could get, they would take. And then now they come into this, so this was always their strength, the team fighting, just them completely understanding when to fight, how to fight, and get the most out of it. Then we come into this tournament, and the first thing they say, like, team fighting, it's a little bit too risky for us. We want to play the macro game because if we lose a hero on an off lane, we can still hold the core. If we lose a team fight, we might actually lose there. And then we go into the games, and it's basically like they are playing the macro game, doesn't really work out on the first map, and they're saying, you know what, guys, last year was a pretty good year. Let's just make sure we play the same style again and go into the fight.
This has been a very common thing within the region, though. Their identity has been ever changing, and their interpretation of it has been always different, at least from our analysis at the western half of the world. They, for a long time, like you said, the Deathball team fighting compositions, they were outstanding and they accepted that identity. But then it wasn't until around the formation of SPT as an actual roster way long ago did it bust out the Zagara split pushing, always focus on the macro side, and then that China performed worse than it ever had throughout history. And now it seems like they're kind of bringing it back to like, what is truly the middle ground here? They still think that macro is the best thing to stop the bleeding of maybe a losing game, but it just, you can tell that they aren't confident on what they actually think is their greatest strength overall, at least when it comes to their words and their play.
Now, we have to throw their substitute player in here once again. It is Shy, and I was thinking when we saw it, okay, is maybe he the one point where they're saying with him we're not comfortable enough to play the normal macro that we like to play, but he was part of that foreman or the tri-lane on the bottom of Dragonshire, where you're usually not too worried about it. I would have more understood that transition now if he was the solo laner, the Dahaka player that has to make those global plays and maybe doesn't really fully understand this particular style that CE wants to bring into play. Why do you think that adjustment now happens from completely changing what they were saying is their style that they want to show here?
I think also, well, I mean, you bring up your question, but I think one of the answers that kind of answers it is one, that Shy does fit in with this team. They talked about it. They are confident with him. They are willing to run with it.
He plays the same heroes.
Yeah, he plays the same heroes that we have from the past on their older roster. I think if you look at all the Chinese teams right now and their roster swaps they had to make or the subs they bring in, I think CE is probably in the best position to play what they would normally play. Yeah. And so, yeah, they make it work there. I think they shouldn't be so worried. All they need to worry about is whether or not Shy is overstepping because he's trying to make a play.
To prove himself, maybe.
To prove that I'm here to actually show up and be a contender for your team. I'm here to actually allow you guys to be victorious, because nobody wants to be that sub that comes in and gets blamed for the loss.
I think one thing we have to look at too is what is his role within the compositions, right? He is the battery of a double support composition within Ariel. He kind of has to be that guy, you know, like Fan at the mid-season brawl, his conversation about the Vala, like if you have the double support and you're the Vala, a vault backwards is a bad vault. I mean, it's not true, like it's not law, but he's showing you have to be the guy in their face. So suddenly he's playing with 4 different members, having blind faith that they're going to have the backup there, and just the small intricacies of working with your team naturally into that role. No matter whether or not you played it on your team or not, it's going to be different, and maybe that's what we kind of see being displayed here on this series.
Do you also think that maybe him in that position, I can understand this, like what they played with the double support, they always played the Tacita and the Oriole, and especially when you're talking about Tacita, we have seen in the first game, just to come back to that, on level 4 the armor talent. So you didn't try to really get life leech out of it, but instead your focus, which in this case promotes Illidan more than Lunara, of course. But it was also a thought process that if you go into the armor talent, one of the thought process that you oftentimes have is it doesn't only benefit my backline, but if my support is, if my tank is in trouble, I have another tool to keep him alive too. And especially against the Titan killer that we saw from Atanis, you were talking about that earlier, Trixler, that would really help you. But I think with the way that Shy played then on the hyper carry, maybe Tacita was forced to focus way more on the hyper carry in this setup that they played than he wanted to, so he couldn't support Muradin in the same style. Could that be one of the reasons why they were struggling a little bit with this and just showcasing that bringing that new player in poses challenges to the team despite him playing the same role and similar heroes?
Yeah, I mean, obviously they're looking to be a little bit more flexible and make sure they can get those shields where they need to be at. Also with Lunara, you can kind of get away with going with that level 4 talent instead of the lifesteal. And Illidan by himself, he can bring in his own lifesteal and get through the fights pretty well, especially with that level 7 coming online. So yeah, I can see your point being there, and they're just trying to bring in the Tacita and make sure that 4-man is still good to go, and they have that flexibility to be able to pull it off. On the other side though, looking over to the Korean team, man, I just want to see them put that pressure on that Lunara, on Shy, try and get in that back line, because they've kind of relaxed a little bit, it feels like. I think Dahaka is getting some decent tongues in, but if they can come in for a rotation, come in for a flank, I could see them break down Shy or even Ariel.
Yeah. We're going to find out if they can take that, but before we are heading back into the game, we're going into a quick commercial break, so we'll be back in a few. Stay tuned, guys.
Stitches was shame. Stitches what playtime. Stitches played too rough. No one play with Stitches. But Stitches found Nexus. In Nexus, everyone has to play with Stitches. So much playtime makes Stitches hungry. bring them the pain.
Deep within the forests of Lordaeron lies the kingdom of Zul'Aman and its zealous guardians, the Forest Trolls. During Azeroth's Second War, the Amani warlord Zul'Jin struck an alliance with the Orcish Horde in order to eliminate the Trolls' ancient enemies, the Elves of Quel'Thalas. But their pact would not last. With the Horde's defeat, Zul'Jin and his kin returned to the forests. Now, drawn into the Nexus, he still seeks a way to enact his terrible vengeance. Zul'Jin is an aggressive ranged assassin whose Berserker Rage increases his attack speed and damage at the cost of his health. Zul'Jin's trait, Berserker, has both a passive and activated effect. Passively, Berserker increases his basic attack speed as his health lowers. When activated, Berserker increases his attack damage, but also drains his health as he attacks. Berserker can be toggled on and off at will. Zul'Jin's first basic ability, Grievous Throw, hurls his axe forward, dealing damage to the first 2 enemies it hits, marking them. Marked enemies take increased damage from Zul'Jin's next 3 basic attacks, or until the mark expires. His next ability is Twin Cleave. When cast, Zul'Jin throws his 2 axes in a unique circular arc that returns back to his position. Any enemies hit by an axe take damage and are slowed. The slowing effect will stack if an enemy is hit by more than 1 axe. All Forest Trolls have the gift of regeneration, and Zul'Jin is no exception. When activated, he channels for a moment and regenerates a significant amount of health. Moving or taking damage will interrupt the effect. Zul'Jin's first heroic option, Taz Dingo, provides him some incredible survivability. By channeling the power of the Loa, Zul'Jin gains the unkillable status, which prevents him from falling below 1 health until the effect ends. His second heroic ability, Guillotine, is a deadly tool of destruction. This hefty axe can be thrown a large distance and deals immense damage to enemies in the impact area. Guillotine's damage significantly increases as Zul'Jin's health lowers. Zul'Jin lives and fights on the axe's edge. Activating Berserker increases his attack speed and damage, but costs a small chunk of his health for each of his basic attacks. At low health, Zul'Jin dishes out a ton of damage, but does so at great risk to his survivability. Don't be afraid to pull back and use regeneration to reclaim some much-needed health. Both of Zul'Jin's heroics play directly into his health pool. At low health, Guillotine's damage increases significantly, and a well-placed throw can take down multiple heroes at once. Taz Dingo can be used in conjunction with Berserker, leaving Zul'Jin at 1 hit point for an extended period, maximizing the strength of his attacks. Zul'Jin is a strong solo laner, and his ability to ramp up his damage can easily bully enemies out of his lane. Use Twin Cleave to chase them down. Hurl his axes forward and watch as your enemies run right into your slowing blades. Leverage heroes that can shield, like Medivh, Tassadar, or Zarya, to make aggressive plays. Try pairing up Zul'Jin with Lieutenant Morales and have her keep your health steady as you take full advantage of your Berserker trait to tear your enemies to shreds.
You want axe?
Zul'Jin, Warlord of the Amani, is ready to enter the fight, whether you want his axe or not. Make sure to leave us a comment to let us know what you think, and you can always subscribe to Heroes of the Storm here on YouTube or around the web if you want to keep up to date. We'll see you in the Nexus.
Fall before the might of the king.
Varian Wrynn, father, warrior.
No one drinks water in the real world.
Welcome back, everybody, to the HGC Eastern Clash, and we are currently in a game with CE and Tempest. Tempest having the 1-0 lead in the series, but on Sky Temple, CE, the Chinese team, has so far impressed.
Yeah, CE looking a little bit better here once Lunar started to go ahead and pull on back and play a bit safer. Aloof, of course, and Tacit are able to bring in those heals, and we have the Odin in the mix, so that's definitely making things a little bit more difficult for Tempest.
It seems a bit that especially Arthas is having a huge impact on the aggressive plays that Tempest is trying to pull out here. Dehaka is having a lot of trouble reaching that backline and being a threat.
I mean, the wins, every time I see him on the Arthas, I just feel like his name fits the hero so well. He just brings the cold wind and just is such a problem to be able to deal with on the other side. And he's able to display that here in this game.
Roleplaying confirmed. All right, let's jump back into it. Good luck, guys.
Well, let's check out if Wind is once again able to save his backline here. 14 versus 14 in levels, kill count nearly even, but the big difference is really the structural advantage that CE currently has over Tempest. There is a Mule on level 7 for Abathur, but so far he has not been using it too much. Right now in the mid lane, the save on the fort.
It's so
but
low.
CE is going to try and change that any moment now.
No way.
You cannot tell me that they're walking away from this.
Okay, they gave it up. Tempest gave it up. The fact that, oh wait, Hong Kong is still waiting in the wakes. There goes another W. No Mule this time. I refuse to believe this. Win, gonna get dragged there by H82. Clone's already been dropped here, but he's getting that beautiful, beautiful slow.
Isolation used as well.
It's gonna be used. Lockdown, getting that pressure onto Shy, but nobody able to get the kill. Now CE is able to get themselves that mid fort they've been working on so long. Paradise. Dancing around, H82 gets the Burrow and the Ancestral. Tempest once again losing another skirmish here in this game. The members of CE split away. You could see they may be considered a boss play, but with those shrines up in 16, they're going to have some free structure damage.
Boss was really tempting there. You are so close to level 16 and your opponent just burned Ancestral and the clone as well. So in this situation, they could have made the play, but the Temple's activating. Pull them back for now, so they're trying to get the objective first. But for Tempest, this is extremely rough now. They transition to the bot lane, but they don't have the 16 talent, so CE really has an opportunity here.
It's going to be very important that CE, I normally would say, is move around and try and be able to force the fight, but with a 2-fort advantage, it's one of those, it's in your best interest, but it's not a must-have.
I like what they're doing now. I mean, Illidan on the middle, you move to the bot lane, and Illidan can always hunt in.
Yeah, that completely correct. It's just abusing the fact that they have that global and have the lane advantage. But now that Tempest with the Abathur and the Dehaka soaking is closing more and more onto the 16 mark, which is why they see the constant dance, waiting for that to pick up and then willing to take the fight to CE. And it's going to be crucial. Tempest is too far behind in this game to be willing to go, even in these shots any longer. They need to get themselves a team fight, and more importantly, they need to win it.
Illidan gets the shots in the middle, and CE is already in position with Arthas. Hong Kono right next to him. And of course, Illidan is going to be willing to move down any second. Murden trying to cut him off here, trying to zone a bit for Dehaka, who's soaking the last 2 shots. But this is now H82, who's in a bit of trouble. 16 on both sides, but Tacit are being jumped right away. In they come as Paradise is hunting in with Illidan.
Hong Kono able to get that ancestral healing for the first time this game, but Wins is doing so much work there, diving the backline. Hong Kono cannot get the escape, and meanwhile, they're dealing with the clone perfectly. Dehaka down, Greymane down. CE is here to play, bring the fight on to Tempest.
CE is bodying Tempest, dropping 3 heroes on the clone in this fight, and especially Greymane had no impact whatsoever in this fight after the initial engage. Arthur is moving in, zoning him out and dropping him eventually, and that is now CE taking an easy boss. They're already in a fantastic position here, but with this boss, they can push for the first keep of the game.
That's a bit of why I was talking about the Murden versus the Tyrael opportunity. When Arthas is diving, slowing everything, moving through, you essentially have 1 cycle of cooldowns until the 20 mark hits and you have the opportunity to move into the rewind. That to be able to deal with the Illidan. Otherwise, Arthas and Illidan together is going to be a colossal problem that you have to find a solution to. So far, Tempest has been unable to do so. Sign moving into, the Dwarf Toss, getting the stun there at the 16 mark with the heavy impact might help, but it makes them even more linear in how they have to approach this next team fight, and I'm suddenly very concerned for their success in this game.
Yeah, CE is playing this really nicely now, also with the timers here. They waited after the boss for Arthas to come back into the middle and also in the same time took the Siege Giant camp. So they're trying to push with everyone they have through the bot lane, except for Illidan, of course, who can hunt in when needed. and have a second camp also moving in. So they want that keep right now. It's even talents, but CE is just one level away from 20. And Tempest is currently putting everyone down to that bot lane to try and defend this camp.
Yeah, they're even willing to use that clone there on lockdown. 50 more seconds and that'll be off cooldown, but it won't be within at least the first 50% of the shots on that top altar that has just find its way into the map. Fortless is every single team here. Tempest has signed there, maybe questioning if he wants to get a fight. They do have the Adrenal Overload. One opportunity they had in this game was possibly moving into give him the Axe, because Merton is one of the best, again, targets in the game. But with that heavy impact, they want to make sure they get the Dwarf Toss, they stun multiple targets, and when they do that, they need to kill it.
Tempest wants to force the fight pre-20. CE is in a spot where they gave up the kill against the keep, against a mule on Abathur, but here comes the battle without the 20. CE is willing to fight the Ancestral, hits on Kona, but look how low he is, and once again, Wins is just running him down with Paradise chasing the hyper carry on the side of Tempest as well. Down goes Greymane, and Sign is going to fall eventually here as well. This is another double kill, and we have another temple on the map. Level 20 has hit, even with the keep at the bot lane not falling. This is a fantastic position for CE.
It's looking like we got ourselves a game number 3 at the rate at which the Chinese representatives are playing here. The struggle, you know, for CE has been absolutely amazing, and looking through their track throughout all of HGC China, being so very dominant up until the midseason brawl, SPT going and representing the region there, then coming back and being able to get the upset, and now falling kind of a little bit to the wayside. They're showing that they're willing to bring it here, though, at this tournament, even maybe not having their full 5-man roster. And now, after game number 1, or series number 1, that we saw between MVP Black versus DK and the sketchy game number 2, and what we see here, I feel like Korea has got to be not nearly as confident anymore as what we heard from them through those interviews yesterday.
Yeah, I would absolutely agree. The only thing that I'm a bit worried about, and I think they are already making sure that this isn't even being the case, CEs has to take down the structures because of Abathur's meal. It didn't take the keep at the bot lane. They have not yet finished the one up at the top, but now with them also, of course, understanding that and saying, guys, we have level 20. We need to drop these structures, so Abathur eventually is going to just completely heal them up again. They're moving in, they're trying to make that happen, and that top keep is going to fall.
One keep now has been achieved in this game. A lot of damage, though, onto the bottom one, and still a reasonable amount for them through mid. Tempest has to find themselves the 20. And realistically, because they are, again, so far behind structurally, it's going to either be a miracle play or that awkward boss fight that we might see moving on. If I'm Tempest, I don't want a team fight for the rest of this game. It's been pretty apparent you are outcomped, at least outclassed when it comes to how these teams are executing their composition. So finding another way to make a win condition is really essentially hoping for a misplay on the side of CE around a boss.
Trying to play around the global, going onto the side lanes with Dehaka and making sure that the pressure together with Abathur is just strong enough to push in maybe a structure. But at this point, it is still looking... I don't really see it happening, to be honest, not with how CE has been playing the entire time. And to me, a lot of this comes down to them controlling Greymane so well. Greymane Lily Ming, the combo that Tempest used on the first map, especially with the Wisdom Duelist being such a huge damage boost when you're not challenged, that was really what made that first game. But right now, Tempest is just not getting the pressure in.
Oh my.
This could be a kill though, and if that happens, if Lunara falls here, that might be it. Hankono jumping in for the Leaping Strike, putting Shy into a decent position. The Wind again putting the pressure onto Rhaegar this time. Lockdown on the copy is going to lose that, and this is just not looking good. Look at Hankono again! Arthas is just completely destroying him with the help of Illidan every single fight.
The Ancestral was dropped there, and I couldn't tell if that was actually intended or if in fact it was just both targets getting pressured so heavily. Either way, CE is just freaking cleaning shop. Tempest having no opportunity throughout this entire game to be able to take the team fight, and now they've got the Illidan composition. Whether or not they're all dead or alive, it doesn't matter. CE's got a game, and now we're going to game number 3.
The pressure play against first Rhaegar and then again against Greymane, just too much for Tempest to deal with. This Arthas with so much impact in game number 2, making it happen. CE ties this series and brings us to game number 3.
The biggest thing now that we know we're going to a game number 3, it is 1-1. If we go to a map like Tomb, is it as awkward and as clunky from the side of CE as it was on game number 1? Because I'm going to say, probably. They have been so constant in their play and failure to pressure onto macro. If I'm Tempest right now, I just go choose a small map, 0% chance we lose this game. It's very crucial that CE evolves in this tournament, or if Tempest exposes a potential weakness right now, it's going to be very, very difficult with this roster.
The one thing that is weird to me is just simply, again, you come into this tournament and you say, our strength is macro. They said literally, we want big maps so that we can show our macro style. Right now, I'm looking at this, I'm saying, like, you want a team fight every single game. You were so dominant here, and when you try to play the macro game, you were outclassed. So I have no idea what to expect from CE at this point.
I hope to see a little bit more team fight here. They looked much more confident
Yeah.
there for Sky Temple, which was impressive to see. First off, they got 3 different types of heroes that could actually do damage or sit on a target, compared to in game number 1, where we only had that Lenara, right? That could be the only one that could really bring in that kill potential. When they brought in multiple heroes to force those team fights, they looked much more effective. On the other side, though, you do have to criticize Tempest a little bit here. They moved into go for the throat gray main against an Arthas. Why not maybe go for that Cursed Bullet if you want to have some kind of pressure on that front line? And if not, you need to dive that back line. And they never dived that back line until that final moment in that end there, where Muradin missed out on the big heavy impact that could have been beneficial for the double gray main to get the kill on the Lenara. But at that point, you just had an Aegis and, of course, a Leaping Strike out.
And let's remember that it's not like that was a draft pressure. We traditionally know in the Western world, when you see an Illidan, there's going to be an Arthas. There was a rotation for picks. Arthas wasn't banned, and the Dahaka was prioritized, then the Rhaegar, leaving the last pick into the Muradin later on. They had the opportunity to get that deny, remove the synergy onto the other side. So Tempest has got to be going, look at the draft number 1, or draft in the first place. Step number 2 is going to be executing a bit more clean for game 3.
Illidan also had a huge, he had a huge impact on it. We talk about Arthas, and of course the play on the wind was great. Just locking down Greymane was incredibly important. But Illidan was always keeping them busy as well in these fights. Just felt that the aggressive style that we saw this time way more catered towards the strength of CE. It's just, to me, really interesting of how they were saying they wanted to play here, and I don't know. That Korea said, we don't really respect the double support to that extent. This is not a hard double support with a Uther and an Oriel, but you still have the Tassadai in there. And they said, in their opinion, what you have to do, you ignore everything else, you just simply jump on the hyper carry and you take him down. In this game, they couldn't make the kill happen. And once they lacked out on the kill, it just always turned against them.
Yeah, it's on the note of like trying to talk about CE and their original angle that they're going for and how it's kind of like what they're playing right now. The first question you have to ask yourself, if you consider yourself a strong team in one area, but you fail to even display that in some way, shape, or form within a series, is it actually a strength? I think that's the first question, because if you can't identify your strengths and weaknesses, or you misidentify, they aren't actually true into the first place. And so I am concerned for their ability to be able to adjust. But the reason why I'm bringing it up is so early into this tournament is it's not the first time we've ever seen it. It's been displayed for I'm going to say about 9 months within the Chinese region on their evolution of their meta and their idea of how to be able to properly play the game. And right now, it just feels like their strength and weaknesses, specifically for CE, is just, I don't know, kind of muddled in muddy water.
Well, they just won